So I'm very happy to be here today with Andrew Perez of The Lever, who recently was one of the writers on a very important piece. Andrew, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me.
So this, to my knowledge, is the largest political donation that we've ever seen. Can you just give some of the basic details here?
Sure. So we reported on a $1.6 billion donation from a little known businessman in Chicago who ran this company called Triplight, which manufactures surge protectors and sort of power strips and equipment for data centers. And so he put his entire company into a nonprofit that's run by Leonard Leo, who is the architect of the Supreme Court's conservative supermajority. He helped pick five of the six justices while helping lead these efforts to confirm them, and then efforts to bring them cases before them as well. And so this man, Barry Side, put his business into this nonprofit run by Leonard Leo, which then sold the company Triplight for $1.6 billion. And it's yeah, as far as we understand it, it is the largest political advocacy donation that we've ever encountered. We believe it's the biggest one of all time. And we're looking at donations to these what we call dark money groups, which are like 501c4 nonprofits known as like social welfare organizations that can spend money on politics.
Yeah, and one of the things that really caught my attention here is that I had never heard of Barry Side. Apparently, he has been quite active as a donor, but I've been following politics for years, and I just think I know some of these big names. I had never heard his name before. Can you talk a little bit about how he managed to fly so under the radar?
Yeah. Well, so he is very little known. There's been very, very little reporting on Mr. Side over the years. He's barely been in even like the Forbes or even the business press. He's been rarely been covered in the business press. He was never on the Forbes billionaires list. But we know that he was pulling in like hundreds of millions of dollars each year. In 2018, he took in like $157 million in income. Most of that came from Triplight. And while he was getting fantastically wealthy, he was also becoming a very prolific donor behind the scenes. So part of the issue is he seems to have favored giving through dark money groups where that wouldn't disclose their donors, so he wouldn't have to deal with any kind of press attention. But we know that between 1996 and 2018, looking at his tax returns, that he claimed $775 million in charitable deductions. So that's at least, he gave at least that amount of money, and potentially much more.
Yeah, another thing here that kind of caught my attention is you guys noted this in the piece, and I do want to actually, I meant to bring this up at the start, but I'll bring this up briefly. Go to the lever for this and other fantastic pieces. I really encourage my audience to follow their work. One of the few outlets that I think is routinely very trustworthy, and thank you guys for that. But one thing you guys noted here is that the donations are not limited to politics. He's also seems to donate to religious institutions, to think tanks. Can you talk a little bit about how he seems to be kind of altering public thought and not just directly influencing electoral politics?
Yeah, well, so one of the institutions that he's been donating to, we believe, is George Mason University. He's believed to be the donor behind this $20 million anonymous donation that Leonard Leo coordinated to help rename their law school after the late Justice Antonin Scalia. We believe that he's been giving to, we know that he's been giving through his foundation to like religious groups, specifically to groups that support Israel, and that's something that we believe he probably has done a lot more of, but we wouldn't really know.
Gotcha. Yeah, and he, what we know from about his ideology is that he is fairly right wing.
Yeah, well,
A
so
little
one
bit
of the
about
things
what we know about Barry's political views.
Yeah. Well, so we don't know a ton about his political views. We are digging into this. We're talking with more sources, but we know one of the institutions that he's funded is called the Heartland Institute, and it's a sort of known for being it's an infamous climate denial outfit, just denying the whole idea that climate change is both real and something that anyone should care about. We believe that he's a big believer in Milton Friedman and conservative economics. And he went to the University of Chicago right at the dawn of the Chicago School, as it's known, the group of economists who helped move the field of economics to the right, and to where it is, how we know it today.
Yeah, I mean, all the monetarism and fear mongering about deficits and a lot of the stuff that we're still dealing with as progressives today, I think, comes from that school of thought that has kind of continued to hold the economics profession hostage in a sense. Another aspect of this that really caught my attention is that the ways that trusts are used to sort of be secret, they seem to sort of escape the public record. First, can you talk a little bit about that? And second, I'm curious if you think maybe there are other donations similar to this that we just haven't seen reported that wouldn't necessarily be part of the public record. Do you think this is a much more common occurrence than we might currently know?
Yeah, well, so I don't think it's common, at least, so it's somewhat common to do what Side did, donating like appreciated property to nonprofits. It's uncommon for that to be done with 501c4s, but,
Mm,
part of that is probably that he was donating so much money that he wasn't really concerned about an additional charitable deduction. But as far as the trust format goes, so those don't have to register with like any kind of state entity. If you register a corporation, most nonprofits are registered as corporations. You would have to register that with like the Secretary of State's office. With the trust, you don't have to do that. So the upshot of that was the Marble Freedom Trust, this group that took in this $1.6 billion. No one really knew it existed until now, even though it's been in operation since April 2020. And it took all this money in March 2021, or that's when the sale was completed. So it's really as opaque of a setup as you can use. And there are kind of additional benefits to it too. If you're a donor, and you want to ensure that your money is going to be spent the way you want it spent, this is like a reliable avenue for that. Also, you can, nonprofits generally need a few people on the board, usually three. The Marble Freedom Trust does not need to do that as a trust. Leonard Leo is the sole trustee of it. They do have like a succession plan in place, but he is the sole trustee, and it's at his discretion to deploy this money.
I see. And I also want to ask you about Tyler Greene, who I also had not heard of, who apparently was the founder of this trust. What do we know about him?
Yeah, well, so he's listed in the tax return as an administrative trustee, but he allowed this trust to be registered at his house. He is a lawyer with the conservative law firm Consovoy McCarthy, which has definitely, it's known for being pretty Trumpy. It's definitely been involved in some kind of Trump election legal challenges. The firm, but anyway, he's also a former Utah Solicitor General, so he was like a high level official in the Utah Attorney's General office. And it's the Utah AG whose job actually is to regulate trusts. So
Mm.
it's definitely an interesting setup. Yeah.
So how did we get to this? This might be a somewhat naive question because we've had, going back to like Buckley v. Vallejo, a lot of these findings have kind of gone towards hiding financial or allowing financial donations into politics in ways that I think, even across the political spectrum, people tend to find really unpalatable. But how did we get to a place where this level of secrecy is allowed and there's this kind of connection between public institutions like the AG and dark money like this being thrown all over the place?
Yeah. Well, so Leonard Leo's network, his courts network, which has been in operation since 2005. So it is a 501c4 engaged in both political advocacy and issue advocacy, and it's so the Buckley v. Vallejo decision is what kind of created this special carve out for issue advocacy. ads to run, which are these kind of quasi-political ads often. Though this, what's funny is their judicial advocacy is probably not considered political, like in any way. Running confirmation campaigns for Supreme Court justices is not a political act. So that's the framework that they've operated under. Though they also are going to presumably be spending money on politics. They also donate, heavily to the Republican Attorneys General Association, which is a 527 political organization that supports Republican AGs. Those Republican AGs then bring cases before the court, including before the Supreme Court, including the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization case that recently overturned Roe v. Wade and invalidated federal protections for abortion rights.
Yeah, that it really is insane to me. You referenced the sort of the separation of politics and judiciary, campaigns. I think that's interesting in so many ways because it actually seems like that's also how we talk about the judicial branch, as though it is somehow detached from politics, even though it's politicians that are appointing them, and it's often political issues that they're deciding. The Dobbs decision is obviously one of the big ones and one that's gotten a lot of attention. But the other aspect is obviously that the court has, and even a lot of the liberal justices have pretty steadfastly sided with corporations. Can you talk a little bit about that and how Leo and others have influenced the judicial system in those ways?
Yeah, yeah. So we've done some reporting on that. There are studies that show that this current court is the most pro-corporate of like in history. They side with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce more often than any other court in history. But that is a trend that we've actually seen for like several years running, where the court has become just more amenable to the U.S. Chamber and to business interests. It is a long-term feature of this court. It is not just it's not just the current conservative makeup, though. It's become supercharged in recent years. But yeah, so the Leo groups are really interested in abortion rights, obviously, but they also do want to chip away at the regulatory state generally. And if you look at the Republican AGs who they fund, they have also been taking these cases to the court to try to limit particularly environmental regulations, like the West Virginia versus EPA case that we saw, where they were basically trying to say that the Clean Air Act doesn't authorize the EPA to regulate climate emissions at all, or carbon emissions at all.
Yeah, that's absolutely wild. And the fact that they can just—it's insane to me that they can just purchase this effectively. It almost is contradictory that we try to separate politics from the judicial branch, but at the same time we let it be purchased in this manner. It's just something else. The other thing I wanted to ask is, how do you How do you see this evolving going forward? How do you see activists being able to, it seems sort of helpless to me to even punch into this issue at all, despite the fact that some like 80 or 90% of the country wants money out of politics. Do you have any opinions on how we can proceed to try to fix this problem? It seems so difficult.
Yeah, no, it is really difficult. As journalists, we're always kind of more focused on identifying the problem, exposing the problem, than identifying solutions. There are some bills in Congress, like the Disclose Act has been under consideration for like well over a decade now, and that would require nonprofits to disclose their donors if they're spending on judicial advocacy campaigns and also on political campaigns. And I mean, I think that's a highly important bill, or a highly important measure. It is absolutely heinous that that billionaires can influence policy so covertly and so transparently at the same time. Just with giant donations like this, and this is a kind of extreme case, this $1.6 billion, but this is something that's been happening, right? Like the Leo network has been spending tens of millions of dollars every year on judicial elections or on judicial elections at the state level and judicial confirmation campaigns at the federal level. And it's I do think there is a definite utility to exposing this problem, and that I think the public does deserve to know, and I do think it's something that instinctively makes a lot of people upset, the amount of money that's pouring into politics. But it also, I do think it makes it, the whole situation makes it kind of difficult for people to actually know what it is like that they're seeing like in front of their faces, like when they're watching TV or even just browsing the internet, like being on Twitter or being on Facebook and being force fed these ads. I don't think that people necessarily can process that in real
Mm.
time. But so I do think it is really important to keep reporting on these stories and to push for disclosure generally.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of disappointing that this hasn't caught a lot more attention than it has. Quite frankly, this seems like one of the most important stories of the year. Like I would really put it up on that kind of scale that we're finding out that this kind of donation even can occur, let alone in the amounts that's been disclosed. Can you talk a little bit about the media and how they often seem sort of turned off by revealing this? Can you talk about why that is and I don't know how to proceed with that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think we've made a whole news outlet at the Lever by making it our job to follow the money and to cover stories that are not being covered thoroughly in establishment and corporate media. I do think that that the Leonard Leo Network has been like figuring out who funds them has been kind of a priority for money in politics reporters for the last several years, and this is like the first time we've really seen it. I do think, and actually that is the case. We really have seen very few of their donors over the years. We
Hmm.
haven't known even like a small fraction of who's been funding these efforts to install judges on the Supreme Court. I guess I have been a little encouraged that there has been some calls, like there was like a Washington Post editorial board piece a few days ago calling for the Disclose Act to be passed in response to this news. Um, and there, we did see, we've been following, we have seen like some decent pickup on our story. And I should say we also got to partner with on this story with ProPublica, and we're really proud of that, and happy to partner with such a like a reputable organization that really helped bring this story to light.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to put their name out there too. That's huge. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. And can you just tell the audience where they can find you and where they can find the Lever and how they can help you guys out?
Yeah, well, so you can find the Lever at levernews.com. Please feel free to subscribe, either paid or free. You can find our Twitter account at Lever News, and you can find me on Twitter at Andrew Perez DC.